So good evening, welcome for the first meetup of Brussels Blockchains in 2021. So today we are hosted by Citizen Corner, so it's a new building that has been taken over by Xavier and different communities. So I think when he will be done with his pizza, he will certainly explain you what's the goal. So I propose that we have a very short introduction about the place, what's happening here, what might happen if you want to be involved, and then we will have tonight two presentations. It will be more or less 20-25 minutes each, I think. The first one is about the history or the prehistory of Bitcoin, just for everybody to know where it's coming from, what was the state of mind and the philosophical point of view behind all those technologies. Then we will have half an hour to speak and to discuss, and then the second part will be more for beginners to understand the technical concept behind the blockchain, because we saw that a lot of people are in touch with cryptocurrencies, for instance, especially the last years, but have no clue about anything behind how it's organized, how it's working, and I think it's important for everybody to be aware of that. So I think in the room here we have 3,000 people, I would say, complete beginners. So I hope you will enjoy the presentation and you will learn stuff. We have very advanced users, and I'm counting on them maybe to challenge what I'm speaking about, what I will present, and to bring their opinion. And people in the middle, and every feedback is welcome anyway at the end. So that's the first attempt to have a more formal presentation. In the past we had mainly meetings in the bar to discuss, so it's a different format. If you enjoy it or if you have improvement idea, please let us know at the end tonight. So I will leave the floor to Xavier. And
thank you. Hi everyone, welcome to the Citizen Corner. So yeah, this is a new temporary occupation. This building used to be the building of the post office, actually, that is on Avenue Rogier. So it's a massive building. It's been cut in two, and for the past 10 years or so, this building has been empty, which is kind of a shame because it could be so much can be done in this building, right? So we negotiated with the owner to be able to do a temporary occupation for the community, for the neighborhood, and so we just got a key like a couple of weeks ago for a year, at least a year. And so yeah, we invite everyone to basically suggest activities that we can do here for citizens. We believe that in the face of the climate emergency, deep adaptation, we really need to rebuild communities, local communities, make them more resilient. And actually also believe that the blockchain and all of those technologies can really help for that. So that's why it's great to have the Blockchain Brussels community here. And so yeah, and we would love to run this place as a collective, as a DAO, for the blockchain, lingo. And so yeah, that's why we introduced like a card at the bar, the citizen card, that you can top up with cash or also by contributing to the community so that you can get beers and other stuff. So don't hesitate to have a look on citizencorner.brussels online or on Facebook, Citizen Corner. And yeah, we hope to see you around. Thank you.
Je peux juste dire que s'il y a des gens qui ont du mal avec l'anglais, qui préfèrent suivre en français, c'est par ici.
Yes, so we have, Lilou is here, and Lilou is a professional translator. So if anyone needs translation in French, she can help. Donc on a ici, je vais dire en français parce que sinon c'est un peu débile. Si quelqu'un a besoin d'une traduction en français de présentation, il y a Lilou qui est une traductrice professionnelle et qui est super sympa et qui veut bien traduire pour vous, donc vous pouvez la trouver au fond. Voilà, merci.
So I will start with a short introduction about the meetup. So it has been created in 2013 already. It was a small group at the beginning. I think few of you were part of the creation, I think. So things moved a lot. Originally it was called Bitcoin Brussels. In 2015, 2016 there was a big discussion about should we keep the name, should we change it, for what reason, whatever. So now we are Blockchain in Brussels. And it's just a meetup that is apolitical. I mean, there is no funding, just people who enjoy speaking about blockchain projects, Ethereum, software development, Bitcoin application, and so on, that are just meeting on a regular basis. So what's happened since 2013, in fact? So today we will look at the history. We have here an NFT, so it's a non-fungible token, a piece of art with showing the history. So if you know a bit Bitcoin, you might recognize Roger there. I think you have the first pizza that has been bought. Then you have a mask that is representing Satoshi Nakamoto, who say, I will will disappear somehow. So it's probably 2014. I'm not so sure anymore. But anyway, so you have a Silk Road for the one who know. It was a darknet marketplace that was using Bitcoin a lot. We had also the idea of to the moon, whatever, on social networks. So that's a bit after. In 2015, 2016, you had the meme old. So we see it at the end, it means old for life. So all those stuff, if you are part of the community, you might have recognized some of them. You have even two waves, I think, maybe it's 2015, 2017, the two major hype. So that's what we will. So what we will speak about today is what happened before all these things. Okay. I have another NFT that I will share with you from the same artist that I like, just for the principle. So if we continue the history of blockchains now, we are not only speaking about Bitcoin, so we have MTGOX issue. So that's a big event that happened. I think I see some of you remember or understand what I'm speaking about. You have the bear market. So I guess probably that's why the artist put that here, with the helicopters and everything. You have the pseudo attack of the US authorities. You have all the issue with licenses in New York to be able to sell cryptocurrencies. So that's probably why we have the Statue of Liberty. You have different things until Ethereum project, where you might well recognize Vitalik at the end here. So that's the founder, Vitalik Buterin of Ethereum blockchain. So I guess a small part of the audience understood more or less what I was speaking about. The vast majority have no clue what is it, what's happened, but I mean, we will discover that together. Maybe in the next sessions today, I will focus on the history of blockchains, and probably in the audience, some people will tell me, it doesn't make any sense, history of blockchain, it should be history of Bitcoin. And you are right. But anyway, I will try to explain to you what's the difference between Bitcoin and blockchain. What is it technically speaking, and why people or communities decided to launch such a project or IT solution, I would say. Let's start, when we speak about the history, about what money is supposed to be. So we all know Adam Smith, who say, okay, money solves the double coincidence of once. It's the story that everybody is aware of, that if you have five chicken and someone has 10 lettuce, you want to exchange it, and then you go to the market and you exchange it. Okay, so that's the economic point of view of where money is coming from. I'm sorry to tell you that in fact the barter economy is a myth. So I mean, Adam Smith claims that when people were bartering, they needed money as a medium of exchange to be able to exchange chicken and lettuce or whatever. It was easier to use money, and that's why money has been created. It seems that from a historic point of view, it's completely wrong. There is no evidences that money has been created after bartering, I would say. It's quite the opposite. In fact, people who are used to use money, when they don't have access to it anymore, then we see a barter economy going up. Before that, there is some evidences that we had more a gift economy or something like that. It means that in a village, someone say, I have plenty of whatever, and I can offer some to you, but don't forget, maybe in 2 years' time or next week, if you have something or if I need something, you might have to help me in return. Okay, so that's more social relationship, and they don't exchange coins or they don't exchange shelves or whatever you can think about. Originally, this type of relationship was mainly related to social constructs like weddings. So here it's an example. I found that in a shop here in Brussels, where you can buy this stuff for 400 euros if you're interested. So it's from New Guinea, so it's 15th, 16th century. So we still have proof that people used to have those type of necklace. So it's what you are supposed to offer to your wife when you want to get married as a groom, I would say. So people were exchanging that, and it doesn't have any value. Sorry, doesn't have any value in itself. In fact, it's it's more like a contract. When you say, okay, I give you this necklace, and now I'm entitled to ask for help of your family. So the husband family is supposed to support the wife and the other way around. Okay, so that's a contract, and there is no financial exchange there. What is interesting in this example is that you have some small shelf in this necklace, and those shelves has been used later in Africa during the colonization period, when Europeans came and they say, okay, they don't have any money there in the 17th century, 18th century, so let's use some shelf, because people were already associating this type of shelf with value somehow. But the European imported the idea of having an account of a method of exchange and an account of value, saying you have 5 pieces or 10 pieces of this and it has a value. Okay, so I don't know if some people have other opinion about that. There is a lot of literature on how things have been led to the way we use money now. So there is another point that is very important for me to speak about tonight, is the cuneiform tablets. Probably you heard about that. So what is it about? It's in Mesopotamia a few thousand years before Christus. We had people who were exchanging goods, because when you have a small village, then you can remember who is owning what and what's happened. When you have a bigger city based on agriculture mainly, then you have to store wheat. You have also to pay back, I will say, some workers. So you say, please work with me in the field, and 6 months later you will benefit from a kind of salary, but I mean in goods. So what's happened? How do we store that? So first, we needed a centralized place to store who is owning what and who contracted with who. Okay, so that's how the church or the political power or whatever we call it, the king somehow, took the opportunity to say, I am the reference there. So it was mixed between the political power and the religious power, and he said, in the temple we store everything related to exchange in the village, and we write them on a small tablet like that. So inside your tablet you say, okay, we had a contract, in 6 months' time you have to reimburse, or you have to give me back this, or you have to work for me, or whatever. So that's like a contract. And there we're facing a lot of issues that blockchain is solving. We will think about that afterwards. So one of the issues that if you have a tablet, you store it in the temple. If someone is changing the content, and then 6 months later, we look at it and you say, okay, no, I don't agree on the content of the contract. So how do we manage that? There's the idea to have twice the same information inside the tablet and in a small envelope around. So on the envelope you have the contract, inside you also have the contract. So when people look at the envelope, if they don't agree anymore in front of the priest and they say, no, we don't agree on that, then the priest is breaking the envelope and they see inside that it's exactly the same. So a good way to avoid fraud is to have duplication of data, and a way to compare it, to see that if one has been changed or not the other, it's a proof that there is something strange in the contract. Okay, so just 2 ideas. You have plenty of explanation about what's money, how we are using it now, and everything that you can find online. Now I will jump to something more IT-based. I will say it's about the blockchain. Okay. So what is a blockchain? Here you have also another NFT, so it's a numeric, digital piece of art. So see, that's the type of thing that you can buy on a blockchain. We will look at that probably later. But what is a blockchain? So that's my definition. You have different definitions, so usually it's more or less the same. A blockchain, it's a decentralized database on a peer-to-peer network, where you can probably program stuff and keep track of value. Okay, so it's a larger definition. What is a bit different from the classical accounting approach is that it's decentralized in the sense that it's running on a peer-to-peer network. Where does it come from? In fact, you all know that probably. The first real blockchain, at least open public blockchain, censorship resistant and borderless, and all the properties that you can think about when you speak about open blockchain, it's Bitcoin. Okay, so Bitcoin started in 2008 as a public ledger. What is interesting is that we didn't speak about blockchain before 2014. Okay, so this term has been forged, let's say, by the corporate world, by the finance, by insurance and financial industry. When they say, okay, Bitcoin is nice, but we don't like the idea behind, let's use only the technology to communicate it or to build projects, IT projects. Let's call it a blockchain. Okay? So we don't like the decentralization aspect, but we like the technology, and we try to launch a campaign, I will say, about that. Okay? So, but what were they afraid about, I'll say? So it's the cypherpunks that I will speak about now. That used to be the community that launched Bitcoin originally. Okay, so cypherpunks is something different than cyberpunk. Nothing to do with it. So cipher means encrypting data and being conscious about the personal data and the topics like that. And what I would like to go through with you tonight is to look at what the cypherpunks did. What did they go through to be able to launch in 2008 Bitcoin? Any question or anything? Any remark? Or not so sure. I don't want to be too academic. Or so let's start in '83. I decided to start there, but I mean it's a choice. So we will look together as different technologies that has been built step by step and have been merged together to be able to create Bitcoin, the first open blockchain. Okay? So from my point of view, what is very important is that we have in '83 a blind signature, okay, for untraceable payment. So that's a text written by David Chaum, that is a well-known cryptographer, and he was describing how people could exchange payments online by using a digital signature. At the same moment, we have this type of announcement, I would say. So it's Hayek, a well-known economist. We get several prizes, and he's more in the Austrian school of economics. And I mean, you can see the quotes here. So what he's speaking about is say what we have to think about, that we have to create money that will not be managed by governments. That's more or less the idea. Okay, so we have, technically speaking, some people who try to find technical solution on one side, and then you have, at the philosophical level, also people who are speaking about the context, I mean the concept of getting the government or the states or the power, the political power, the classical political power, out of money management. Okay? So I continue. 83, then we have 88. Very important text that has been published online, Crypto-Anarchism. Crypto Anarchist Manifesto. I will encourage you to read that. That's the basic of all the philosophy behind open and censorship-resistant blockchains. Okay, so that's Timothy May. That's something important to keep in mind. That this guy here. So what he is proposing is that he say you can just see the technology that we have in 85 will allow the world to change. At least the social power structure will be different. Okay? So the cryptography will allow something that was not possible before, and it will probably change the society by putting the government out of the commercial transactions, I would say, and even potentially social transactions. Okay, so it's 88. In 91, something that probably all IT professionals are aware of. That's PGP. So it's a pretty good privacy. That's an open source software that's allowing people to sign messages or emails and things like that with asymmetric keys. So you can sign an email, send it to someone, and the recipient can be sure that you wrote the email without being able to write emails under your own name, if I summarize it this way. Okay, so that's PGP. That's very important. It's used now on a regular basis, but it went through different legal discussion in the 90s. In 93, something that is usually not very well known, to be honest, in the blockchain communities and Bitcoin communities, it's a pseudonymous remailer. So I don't know if someone knows what is a remailer, because I know that we have stronger IT guys here, but I don't know if someone wants to. Okay, so a remailer was an idea to be able to send anonymous messages on the mailing list and to be sure that nobody could know who wrote the message. Okay, so that's how the first cypherpunks mailing list was running. So you need a number of servers run by participants of the network. And what do? They receive a message sent to them. They open a kind of envelope, I would say, the same way as what we saw earlier. And in the message is written, please remove this and this part and reroute this message to server B. Then server B is getting it, it removes some parts, then it's rerouting to D, and all the stuff like that, and it's going in different nodes until the last recipient, but you never know if you are the last recipient, and you don't know, I mean, at every level, it has been encrypted with the private key of the server. Okay? So it's like a big network where people can send information without being known, and it's supported by the community. Okay? And that's exactly how Bitcoin network is working, and or the Tor network, I would say. So it's at least the same principle are still used there. So that's something important, and it was in a period where people say you have to hide what you are exchanging, because from a technical point of view, it's clear that if the network provider, the internet provider can see everything you write. That was clear for people at this time. They already understood that in a few years' time, some companies like Facebook or whatever could have access to the vast majority of citizen data. So they were already thinking about ways to avoid this type of dystopian society. We have in '93 Cypherpunks manifesto. So what is switching here a little bit is that we were not clearly in the technical world yet. It was half philosophical, I would say, but here we enter in a context where the cypherpunk wording has been created first, and especially say what are cypherpunks? Cypherpunks are people who are writing code. Okay, they don't write law, they don't discuss about whatever, they write code. So if you can't write code, you can't understand or be part of the community, because the goal is to escape from the government hands, I would say, and the way to do that is to write code. Okay. I would like also to look at another document that is also a foundation of this type of communities. It's the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. I will let you know. I will let you read it. Then we can speak about it afterwards. Are you done? Okay, so you see that in fact this type of text, it's quite aggressive, I would say. So that people will say, okay, we go, there is a fight to be organized there. I mean, we go on war against stuff that are legal concepts. Almost all the basement of the society. We have property, identity, movement, everything. Okay, so they say we are in different world. The current people on power, they have no clue what they are speaking about. We will build it. Not with them, but in parallel. Okay, that's more or less how I understand it. What is interesting anyway is the last sentence here. So they say that they describe the fact that in this world, this internet world, I would say, you can duplicate things and reproduce it infinitely at no cost. That was something very new. You remember when you have the MP3 files and all the stuff. But this is also an issue. If you can duplicate data without any cost, I think Siri is trying to answer to my question. So if you can duplicate things without cost, you can't beat money. Because if you can duplicate money, it doesn't make any sense, it doesn't have any value. So that was one of the greatest challenges that Bitcoin has to solve. Okay? So it's interesting in terms of patent or in terms of music industry from the cypherpunk point of view, but from a money point of view, there is no value to have something that you can easily duplicate. Okay, so we continue. I think I will have to wrap it a bit maybe. So we have something in '93, Hashcash. So with these remailers from '93, there was a lot of issues because people were spamming. I mean, we all know the spam problems that we are facing everywhere. When it's for free, you don't pay anything, then you can spam. There is nothing to lose. So there is a mechanism that has been invented. It was something that will be afterwards converted into proof of work. So if you know Bitcoin, you know what I'm speaking about. That you have to spend a little bit of time or CPU power to be allowed to participate to the network. So then it's reducing the amount of data you can send. So if you need 1 second to send an email, if you spam, you can spam only 60 people per minute. You can't spam millions of people per second. So that's something that will be used afterwards. 98, we have a real B-Money project. So this is not a technical thing. So it was even not a pilot. It's purely conceptual aspect. So they say, now we have everything in hands to be able to build money. There are different attempts, like Liberty Coin or all the things. All failed, I will say, miserably because of mainly legal issues. And the problem was related to the centralization of the project. So if you say, I'm running my own server here, and you can have our PayPal approach, but that it's open source or whatever, then the authorities are knocking on the door and they say, please stop. So here there's an issue. When they say we have Liberty Coin, they say, no, you can't say you have coins. It's the US government who manages that. In '99, Milton Friedman was looking at the TV and he said, be ready, we will have internet money.
So that I think that the internet is going to be one of the major forces for reducing the role of government. The one thing that's missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash, a method whereby on the internet you can transfer funds from A to B without A knowing B or B knowing A. The way in which I can take a $20 bill and hand it over to you, and there's no record of where it came from. And you may get that without knowing who I am. That kind of thing will develop on the internet, and that will make it even easier for people to use the internet.
And what it means that it's something online that you can use to send money from one person to another without any financial authority and without anybody knowing to who you are sending money. So it's completely anonymous, it's online, and at this time in 1999, internet was well established, at least technically, so it started to have some a lot of use cases for document management and data exchange and all the stuff. But money was still missing, and he said, I think it will come. Okay? And some people say, yeah, we want to make it further. So we have proof of work from Al Finney. So I think proof of work is similar to the anti-spam Hashcash project as I spoke about. What is interesting is that this guy is the first one who received Bitcoin from Satoshi Nakamoto. And who is Satoshi Nakamoto? That's the inventor or the inventors of Bitcoin. And in 2008, someone from nowhere on the forum said, I built something, the software is there, and afterwards he wrote a white paper. He said, you have the source, you can run it on your computer, and it's a digital cash, purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash. So he was using proof of work, he was using Hashcash results, he was using the peer-to-peer network, all the things we looked at before, the asymmetric signature, everything is inside Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, in fact, is the first time different existing technologies has been built together. What is interesting to note is that our friend Nakamoto was anonymous and is still anonymous, and it was also part of the project. It's bringing even more to the myth, I would say. So we don't know who is this person, and it was part of the plan to say it's owned by nobody, everybody can join, it's open, borderless, censorship resistant. You are welcome to participate. Okay? So I think in 2008 Bitcoin is created, so I'm done with the prehistory of Bitcoin, I would say. So the idea was to present all the stuff that has been done before, and especially to ensure that you understand the state of mind of people who create all these things that we will probably look at in the second session, the more on the technical aspect, how it's working and how it's built. But it's very important to keep that in mind. And so the blockchain Brussels team saw that in the past a lot of newcomers, I would say, were arriving in the meetup because they were interested in tradings and things like that. Okay, fair enough. But it's important to understand where it's coming from. And then you can also understand why some member states in Europe are a little reluctant about that. When Facebook say we will launch our own currency having the same principle, it's raising a lot of questions. So that's something that I wanted to present tonight. So if you have any question about that, I'm available. And we will have probably 20 minutes to have a drink or to get some fresh air before we start the second part of the session. Thank you.
I'm an art historian specialized at the PhD in art in the digital age, and what you see, for example, when you address the whole topic of NFTs, and already what happened is that Grimes, partner of Elon Musk, she earned a lot of money with NFTs, and there's already a lot of centralized money going in the market. Also, when you look at who made money with NFT auctions at Sotheby's, it's still a very wide privileged market of people who have money, had money before, and also this is like what is coming back and they earn more. So I'm also concerned when we talk about, and maybe you can explain it a little bit more, like I see a little bit the same tendencies that also happened with the internet in this like in the 90s, that there was, it was a space of free programmation, of also this idea of decentralization. But what happened right now when you look at like Google and Facebook and the big monopolizing of information, it also turned, or the idea also when we look at what happened to Apple, I see a same tendency, and I would like to, but I don't want to be conservative, I just want to understand and also would like to have a little bit more knowledge how to maybe take part in this movement. But what I see right now, also what is happening in the NFT art market, and this is on an aesthetic level also more my specialization, it's already a very conservative monopolized also aesthetics, and yeah.
Thank you. So I think, on my personal opinion, I think a blockchain doesn't change the industry too much. If we speak, if we don't speak about open public blockchain in the financial sector like Bitcoin, everything else, if you have a blockchain on supply chain, then you have the supply chain industry around. If you have a piece of art, then you have galleries and everything, so they are there. Okay, so I think the infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, doesn't change the market too much. If you have the same actors, you have the same behavior. I fully agree with you. So how can you change that? I think it's very hard to know, but it depends. In the open blockchain environment, you can't force people to have the same ideas as yours. You can maybe propose something, and if they follow, fine. But that's why I think so. It might mean that in fact, the market is not so open. So here, for example, we have some coins for the location here. If you want to be, you can buy 5,000 euro currently now, hoping that you will own 95% of the location. Would it make sense to do that? Some people did that in Bitcoin, in Ethereum in the past, with NFTs in the past. They took the risk, and indeed, people who can take this risk, usually they have already a lot of cash. Because you can't afford to do that. It's the same with people who are investing in startups. If you participate in seed or Series A's or whatever, but the difference I see is that in a blockchain, open blockchain project, usually it's permissionless. So you don't have to have an authorization to invest in a startup. You just can say, okay, I buy those tokens and you take the risk yourself. So that's the only difference, but everything else is more or less the same. People are, I guess, the same. So if you want to have something that brings more, that it would be fair with your own approach, you can try to join a project that is not Ethereum with NFTs, for example, to have something else. There is a lot of attempts, but to be honest, until now, the ones who are facing a huge success, that indeed things where financial incentive is very high. And it's bringing certain type of people on board, I would say, if I can say it this way. Yes, Xavier?
Thank you. I wanted to answer that question as well. One thing first, we are starting a new community in Brussels called CryptoArt.Brussels, which is all about trying to get more local artists to embrace NFTs, because the earlier we get local artists of Brussels into that space, the more opportunities there will be for more artists in Brussels to benefit from it. And then the other thing to your question, when you look at the usage of Bitcoin right now and other cryptocurrencies, it's actually in the global south that actually there is more usage than in the classic Western countries. And the reason for it is because the financial system as we know it is working pretty well for the classic Occidental countries, but not so much for all the others. And so the incentive for us, for many people, for us in Belgium especially, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is a vitamin, it's not a painkiller. But for people in El Salvador, for example, where they just started accepting Bitcoin as a legal tender, this is a real painkiller, it's not just a vitamin. And so I think it has also a potential there to change a bit the equation.
Yeah. But another point is also the environmental question that we didn't address yet when we talked.
Yeah.
So, but, yeah.
Yes. So I fully support today. So we can join the NFT community. About the environmental cost, we spoke about it earlier. That's a big topic, a recurring question. We can maybe address it now in this session. So I have to change. So we will see why we need this. At least proof of work based blockchains. So we start about how does it work. Okay. Before speaking about how does it work, I would like also to give you some criteria that I usually use to describe what is a distributed ledger. So what I call a distributed ledger, it's something a bit larger than the blockchain. It could be a private blockchain. So I'm sorry for people who are hardcore open source believers, but I mean we have. So a distributed ledger, we need 5 criteria, from my point of view, to have it. So we need to have a shared record keeping. It means that data are shared between the participants. So imagine that all of us, we are in the same network. We all need on our phone or a computer. Usually it's a big server. We need the full data shared amongst us. Okay. We need also a multi-party consensus. It means how do we add data to this share record keeping? We need some rules to say, okay, you are allowed to add transaction if you follow those guidelines. We need to be able to validate independently our data. So I look at my own data once I'm downloading. If I download the blockchain online, I can look at my computer and I can be sure that everything is correct. I don't need anybody else to tell me, oh, be careful, this is a fraudulent transaction there. Okay, I don't need Visa or ING to check my data. Then we have tamper evidence. I want to be sure that if someone tries to cheat, I will see it. And tamper resistance, it means that I want to avoid that someone can change the past without me seeing it easily. Okay? So if someone tries to change what happened in the past, they send me 5 tokens, whatever it is. They say, okay, fine. Then in 2 years' time, if they take it back, like what you can have maybe with rollbacks and credit cards and stuff like that, I mean, then there is someone else trying to modify my data, and I don't want that in the context of a distributed ledger. Okay, so what's a blockchain? How can we explain it? I don't know if you saw it, but here at the corner of the building, because it's an old post office, we have some lockers that looks like a bit like that, I would say. So from my point of view, it represents a kind of blockchain. So I will explain you how. So what's a blockchain? In fact, it's a set of lockers, I would say, with a private key. The private key is a PIN to open the box, and a public key, a public address, that's the ID of the box. Okay, so if you want to send a letter to someone, I say I want to send a letter to EY15, you put the letter here, everybody is allowed to put a letter. There is no permission needed for that. But only one person can open the box, that's the one owning the key. Or at least, if he doesn't share the key, we can assume that it's only one person. Okay, so 2 things, private key, public key. I will speak about that a lot. Private key is like the password, shouldn't share it. Public key, it's like your address, you give it to everybody. Okay? And the whole locker room is a blockchain. But in fact, this picture is not so nice because if you want to have a real blockchain, it should be transparent. Everybody should be allowed to see the content of the box. It should be plexiglass boxes, I would say. Okay? So that's what is a blockchain. So how do we join a blockchain? I think I wanted to show some stuff, but we don't have too much time, so I will I will tell you. So how do you join the blockchain? How do you get a public address? You don't need to ask anybody, you just create it. You roll dices or you generate a random number, and that's your address. That's all. And you have to be careful that nobody else than you generates the same address. So the address is based on the private key. The private key is 77 digits in Bitcoin. So you just take randomly 77 digits in hexadecimal. But anyway, so you have now in binary, so it's 2 power 77. So you just create your own address, you don't ask anybody. That's something usually very hard to understand, but that's the only way to ensure that you can have a borderless and permissionless application. So you just create your key, and then you are good to go. Okay? Once you have your key, how does it work? So I will use Bitcoin because that's the main things, but okay. So how does it work? Usually you sign a transaction. So I have a phone, I have a client, a small software on my phone. I have my private key, my public key. Okay. With my private key, I sign a message. We'll see later what it means. Something like, for example, sending 5 tokens to Xavier. I send it to internet. I broadcast it to the network. Okay. So everybody can receive this, saying, okay, he sends 5 units. Okay. Is it true or not? Does he have the money? Is it allowed to do it or not? We don't know yet. Then we have a specific type of node, specific type of actors on the network, that the miners. They listen to all the transactions, they put them in their memory pool. So that's something that usually it's over, I mean, we don't speak enough about the memory pool. I mean, from my point of view, this part, the mem pool, it's even more interesting than the blockchain itself. Okay, so they store transactions not validated, I mean, transactions that are not validated yet. They store it locally on the computer, and they start to do something. That's what we spoke about earlier, the proof of work and the computation things. So one of the miners in stage number 4, achieved to solve a puzzle. I mean, it's not complex to solve this stuff. It's required a lot of computing power, but it's just completely done, the computation to be done. And because we see a lot in the newspaper saying it's a very complex puzzle, something. No, it's just so dumb that you have to try millions of times very fast, because you have to try randomly to find the right value. Okay? There is nothing smart there. That's why some people say it's a bit dumb to compute that, but until now there is no better approach to secure the network. And then once a miner added to the blockchain, then every node, everybody, including me, I can update my blockchain with all the transactions validated by the miners. So you have to keep in mind 2 types of nodes: usual clients, normal people, I would say, and miners. Okay, that's the 2 types of factors we need in an open blockchain. Now I will be fast with that. So that's a blockchain. So what is a blockchain? It's a chain of blocks. We have here 5 blocks. In each block we have transactions. The transactions look like that. So 5 bitcoins have been sent from this address to another address. We don't know who is behind. If I don't publish my key, nobody will know who I am. Okay, and then we append blocks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks, and then sometimes you have 1 or 2 or 3, 4 transactions per block here. Okay, so that's the data structure. If we have a blockchain in PRD, in fact, everybody has the same blockchain stored on their computer, exactly the same data. If I switch on my computer and I install the Bitcoin client, first things I will do, I will first download all those data from some people from the network, like a P2P network. I download, it's a few hundreds of gigas now currently, and I get everything locally on my computer. Okay? Once I have that, I'm part of the network. I can switch off my computer whenever I want. I can switch it on 2 days later or 5 years later. Nobody is asking me anything. It's completely open. Okay? Let me see. So now I have peer D and peer B. They want to add transaction. B has a yellow transaction. D has pink and blue, pinkish or blue transaction. They want to add it to their blockchain. What do? They broadcast it to the network. Who is listening to those transactions? The miners. So here we have 2 miners, miner A and miner B. They have a specific equipment. They listen to the network. Miner A is getting 2 new transactions from D. Miner B is getting 3 new transactions. So sometimes miners don't get the same data because they are located in China, in Peru, whatever. So they even don't have to agree on anything. Yeah? And miner A and miner B, they compute stuff, proof of work. Here, miner A is achieving to find the results before everybody else. He said, I have the proof that I compute the stuff. He's sharing with everybody, and then everybody check, and they say, indeed, there is the right value in this block, I can add it, I can append it to my blockchain. We still have the yellow transaction that is still pending in the memory pool of server B. Then, after a while, it's coming anyway to miner A because it went to China. And now they start again. They compute stuff. And every 10 minutes, we add a new block. What's the goal for miners to mine blocks? In fact, they get some rewards. Okay, every 10 minutes, someone is randomly chosen on the network to receive 6.25 bitcoins. And when I say randomly chosen, it means that it's as if you were participating to a lotto or a game based on your computing power. The more you have, the more tickets you get. Okay? That's the only solution that Nakamoto found to be able to allow everybody to join. Originally, the idea was to say every computer can join. One computer, one vote. And then they say, okay, but what happens if someone is buying 20 computers? Then you will get more votes. Or say, okay, maybe one IP address, one vote. So, yeah, but what happens if you buy IPs and you have different stuff? Say, okay, maybe one. Then they mix it with the hash cache stuff we saw earlier, the proof of work, saying okay, you have to spend a bit of electricity. That might work. So that's how we achieve to have this network. So we are spending electricity to compute stuff. If you have a better idea, feel free to propose it to the community. People are searching for a better solution for the last 10 years. Until now, that's the best one. Maybe not the ideal one, but the best one. How does it look like a mining facility? It looks like that. So we have a lot of people who are settling next to free, cheap electricity at least, and they are just computing stuff, and they are having a business with that. I don't know if there is any question before I continue. I would like to speak also, but I think I will not spend too much time there. So that's all the concept that is important to understand in a blockchain. You have a hash, a block, a blockchain, distributed blockchain, token, and address. I will look at that with you. Digital signature, private key, transaction, consensus, proof of work. I don't know if you want the slide, maybe I will share it with you. So that's some concept that we will look at together. And before we look at the demo, I will finish with this slide. We will look at the Bitcoin protocol, how does it work, some rules. So in the governance, we have some rules that people are supposed to follow, all the clients and all the miners. First rule is that we need to create a block every 10 minutes, okay? And that's the challenge. How do we do that? In fact, there is a mechanism to compute the overall computing power on the network. Then there is an algorithm to adapt something called difficulty to ensure that around all the people in the network, only one will find the results within the 10 minutes. Okay, so in the last days, a lot of mining facilities have been shut down in China. So the overall computing power fall down a little bit. So the network in the following days will have to adapt and to reduce the difficulty to ensure that we have a block every 10 minutes. So currently, probably, a block is a bit longer than 10 minutes. It could be 12, 15 minutes. So it's 10 minutes in average. Sometimes it's 30 seconds, sometimes it's 19 minutes, but in average it's 10 minutes. Okay? So that's an important rule. So it means that if you pay in bitcoins, for sure you don't know if it has been approved before the first 10 minutes, but even 10 minutes is not enough. You need to maybe wait for 1, 2, 3 blocks. Usually 6 blocks is good enough, so it's 1 hour. So if you compare with a credit card, it's very slow. If you compare with international wire transfer, it's very fast. So it depends on the use case. Okay, so then we have the block size. There is a constraint in Bitcoin that is 1 mega. Okay, some people say we don't like it, they create their own version of Bitcoin. And we have several ones, so it's a fork. They just say, we don't like these rules, let's launch something else. And 1/3 of the network moved in 2017 in another direction, and it's happened on a regular basis. We can do it now if we want. Now we can say, let's launch a Bitcoin Skarbek. There will be 25 guys, and after a while we will give up, or we will say, no, that's a new Bitcoin. See, nobody can stop you from doing that. And it has no intrinsic value if you don't have enough people who join your network. But it's possible. Then you have the halving, so the reward is changing every 4 years. That's how we can ensure that because it's an asymptotic curve, we know how many bitcoins will be created. So if you have 10 minutes per block and you divide the halving per block, so the halving is the reward per block is divided by 2 every 4 years. And because they are paid the rewards in Bitcoin, we know for sure that there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoins. Okay. and probably it's a bit less because some have been lost, or some miners also sometimes, very rarely, but they don't ask for the reward. So those Bitcoin have never been created, and they will never be. And to finish, we have a script to unlock funds, and we have also something, if we have several blockchains in parallel, so remember I showed you that miners might have different transactions, we could have different versions of the blockchain currently now. For 10 minutes, we have different versions, maybe 20 minutes, people are opening different blocks, but after a while, the rules is that everybody is supposed to follow the longest chain. So if I'm mining, as a miner in Brussels, I have 100 blocks, then I find 101, 102, then I see someone else with 103 blocks, then what I'm supposed to do, I have to switch and come back to the longest blockchain because I'm mining Bitcoins that don't have any value at all. It's a parallel blockchain that is not recognized by the network by design. Okay? It's not so easy to understand, but I mean, the way I explain it is maybe not the clearest one. I will show you something now, a demo, if it's okay for you. I'm not so sure how to do it. And it will be done for this presentation. Let's see. Maybe I don't need the microphone, right? Can you hear me? More? Maybe I should have done that from the beginning. Give me 2 seconds. How can I do it? Okay, so I will explain. Remember, on the slide you have a lot of concepts. I hope spend 30 seconds to 1 minute for each concept, and that's very important that you understand it because if you own already Bitcoins or if you are planning to, you have to understand that to avoid being scammed by people or losing your funds or whatever. Okay, so that's like IT for 5 years old people who wants to children who wants to join the blockchain. Sorry if it's a bit too low level for some of you. I don't know. I mean, okay. So first thing I want to tell you that what is a hash? Okay, that's basic stuff in IT. So you have a hash. It means that it's a fingerprint of a data. If I type a text here, it's computing the hash. It's a SHA-256, so it means that it's 256 bytes. It will always be the same size. So if I take whatever text here, I have a different string. Okay. If I put the whole Wikipedia there, I have the same size. Everything I type is the same, and if I type something like this, it's 185F, whatever. Okay, here it's completely different, far away from the previous one, and if I type again hello, it's exactly the same. Okay, so the whole security almost of Bitcoin is based on that. It's based on the fact that if you have the hash, you can't come back to the data. Okay? If you have the data, you can easily compute the hash. So if I give you this string, and say, what was the text? You have no way to get it. Okay? So that's...
Je ne vois pas Cathy dans votre texte.
Ah, sorry. Okay, so Cathy doesn't show too much. Okay. So now we have... So I think everything is streamed to NSA, I think. What I'm speaking about is somewhere else. Okay, so we have the hash. Okay? The day hash 256 is hacked for whatever reason, the whole Bitcoin network is falling down. So the community will have to change the hash. Okay, that's clear. Until now, it's fine. And every second, plenty of people are trying to compute data from the hash, and they didn't achieve. And with the amount of money on Bitcoin blockchain, it means that it's secure. That's for sure. Okay, so now I go to a block. What is a block? A block is the same. We have a hash here, and we have 3 fields instead of 1. Okay, so if I type something, it's just computing the hash. Okay, what do I have? I have data, I have a number, the block number, so it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, and I have something specific that's called a nonce. I will show you what it is. So here, you see that the background of the block is green. It means that it's valid. It means that, what I mean by valid, in this example, it means that the hash follows the rules. That is, the 4 first numbers are 0. That's a completely arbitrary rules. It's how we define the difficulty. We check how many computers are on the network, and we say, based on the number of computers, we think that if we put 4 0, only one of those computers will be able to compute the hash every 10 minutes. Okay, so that's an assumption. And what do they have to compute? So in fact, I have data. I have to say send three BTC to Xavier. Okay, and I want to send that. To avoid spamming and sending crazy stuff, we spoke about earlier about the proof of work. I have to spend a bit of electricity to reduce the spam. So what do? I'm trying to find in nouns. I'm checking. I'm putting 1 here, 2, 3, 4, because I want the block, the nouns, and the data all put together to be hashed, and I want the hash to start with 40. Is it clear what I say or not? So I have 3 fields. I put them all together. I hash them, and then I get a hash, and I need to have 40 to be allowed to broadcast the transaction. Okay? So I'm trying. I can't change the block number. I can't change my message because I really want to send 3 Bitcoin to Xavier. So I have to play with this field that is put here on purpose. I put 5, 6, no luck. So instead of doing that for hours, I have a small button to mine. So it's just putting 1, 2, 3, 4 very fast. He's doing it for me. The computer is doing it, computing it. Then here I achieve to 83,000. And finally, with 83,472, it starts with 40. So I just stop, it's fine. Okay, that's mining. That's all. That's what they do, the miners. They get a text or they take a data, and they try to hash the stuff to find these small nouns as fast as possible to have a hash that starts with 40. That's all. I don't know if there is any question, but so this computation is completely done on the principle, but it's useful. So then there is an ethical discussion about yes?
Maybe it's more clear to say that in the data you have the lists. It's not like you have to do it yourself if you want to send a transaction, but the miner makes a list of everyone.
Yeah, so in fact, here you have a block. You're perfectly right. But then a block is not enough. We need a blockchain. So we will see, we will add stuff step by step. So in a blockchain, we have different blocks, and then after, we will add the transaction. So I agree, we come back to that. So now, what is a blockchain? We have a block, we understood this stuff with a hash. A blockchain is just several blocks. And how do we link them? We put the hash, like before, we put the data, we put the nouns, we put the block number, and we put here the hash of the previous block. Okay, so they are linked all together. Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3 blocks here, even more, 4, 5. So here, if I want to change the data, I have to mine again because my hash doesn't start with 40. I'm mining, I'm spending a bit of time, a bit of electricity, and then I get it 40. Okay? If I want, for whatever reason, to modify the block number 3 to put something else, it's ready. It doesn't start with 40. I'm mining it. I spend some time. I'm using my CPU. But I have to click on it, sorry. So then it's mining this stuff. I will get 40. But now, because the hash of my block is copied there, then this block is not valid anymore. I have to mine it again because I want 40 in this hash. And you see here, this value has been copied here, and then it has an impact because the hash is computed on the block, nouns, data, and previous hash. So I mine again. I did it 3 times now. So it's 3 times more electricity. So the more I wait, the harder it is for me to modify the past. We already have one criteria that we looked at earlier. Difficulty to change the past, and also if I'm an external auditor, I would say, if I look at the last hash and it's finished by 40, and every block really has the previous hash, then I'm sure that the whole blockchain is fine. I don't have to compute myself. I just say, okay, that's fine. The guy did the work. He spent the electricity, he spent the time, the money, so that's fine. So I can check very fast that is correct. But if I want to make it correct, I have to spend some time on electricity. Okay, any questions before we go to distributed blockchain? I think it makes sense. Huh? I'm sure that the majority of you perfectly know these things. I hope you agree the way I explained it to the newcomer. Now I have a distributed blockchain. I have my blocks on my computer and I say, okay, it's not fun enough to be by myself. I will share it with my friends. So my friends are called peer B, peer C, and so on. Not so nice names. Okay? So what's happened? Everybody duplicates the data. Now, what's happened? Because in the past, in the previous slide, I mean the page, I could change the blockchain and maybe alter the past. Even if I do a little bit, that's fine. But now, all blockchains are correct. They are all green. But if I compare, my last hash is 00FD73, the other one is E4, and this one is E4. So on the network, I'm by myself. My blockchain is not acceptable by the network. Okay? So I can lie to myself, I can spend a bit of money, but I can't lie to everybody else. So it's a pure democracy. 51% of people decide what is the last hash that is acceptable. Okay? So that's a distributed blockchain. It's shared on different computers. So if I want to cheat, if I want to say Xavier sent me last year 1 billion, first I have to mine everything, and then I have to go to every door and say, please change your blockchain in the past because I want. So it's quite hard to do. And that's where we have the decentralized aspect. We assume that if people don't know each other and it's permissionless and they are decentralized somehow, it's very hard to convince everybody to change their mind. Okay? That's what means decentralization. Nothing to do with who is owning what. You see, if I come back to your... So it's technical decentralization. Currently, if you go to a bank, you can maybe have an impact on the bank account by just convincing the employees. Here you can't. There is no employees, there is no centralization. You have to convince 51% of the participants. Now, and that's where you were speaking about earlier. Now we say the transactions, they are here. So in the data, we don't need data. We need really transaction. Transaction means $25 sent from Darcy to Bingley. So we have a list, and it starts to be a ledger. Okay? So here we have the same principle. I want to cheat. I say that Dallas, don't know, I want to steal the money. Okay, same principle. I have to mine. I have to convince the other one to do the same, and it will never work. I mean, you are smart enough to understand that. Okay, same principle. We just have set of transactions instead of data. And to finish, I have the Coinbase concept. So we have block number, the nonce. So yeah, we look here. Block number, nonce, the transaction, the previous hash and the current hash, and also the Coinbase. So you might know Coinbase company. Why did they choose this name? It's because in the Bitcoin protocol, the Coinbase means something. It means the way you can generate rewards. Okay, so they reuse the same concept. So what's happened is that as a miner, if I'm the first one to mine the block, I'm allowed to add a transaction from nowhere, and I can create money. In this protocol, we decide that every block it will be 100. Okay, but currently it's 6.25 in Bitcoin. So so what I will do? I will mine my block. I will say I want to get this money, and I'm mining like crazy. Here, someone else is doing the same in parallel, and they're also trying to mine. Okay, so we are in competition. If Bob gets a green block before me, he gets the reward. He's broadcasting to the network. Everybody checks that the hash starts with 0, and I lost. So then I will get his block, and I will start again, try mine like another time. Okay? So that's what miners do. They just compute stuff. If they're the first one, they are okay, they get the money. If not, too bad for them. What is interesting to see is that in fact, every block that the miners are mining are supposed to be different, because the Coinbase transaction will probably be different, because they don't, okay? So that's how a blockchain works, in fact. Okay, so you have to remember hash, block, blockchain, distributed blockchain, tokens, and Coinbase. Okay. I don't know if there is any comment for people who know that well, or any questions. Yes?
Yeah, well, maybe I'd like to say something about the question that was, well, the concern that was raised earlier about the about the energy usage. And, well, what I think that people mostly forget is that, okay, Bitcoin uses a lot of energy, but this has nothing to do with Bitcoin itself. It has everything to do with the free market that is mining. Bitcoin uses a lot of energy because people voluntarily choose to mine everywhere in the world, and if people stop mining, then it will consume yet less energy. But this has nothing to do with Bitcoin or the Bitcoin protocol. It has everything to do with the freedom of the people that choose to participate in it.
And it's because proof of work is used. Yes?
You can take the mic.
Oh, you prefer? Okay, sorry. So maybe now we can see that's unconfirmed transaction. So if I'm a miner, I'm listening to the network, I get all those transactions, and I see what is happening. So it's public, it's available. But to come back to the proof of work, in Bitcoin we use proof of work. because it has been chosen by Satoshi Nakamoto, and it worked until now. That's the only solution to allow some people to participate to the network without permission. There is other approach, there is proof of stake, that is well known also. So there is another mechanism when we say, sorry, to explain, I will come back to Bitcoin. So why do people mine Bitcoins and spend so much energy? It's because they can earn enough money with that, and also if someone wants to attack the Bitcoin network, it might be more profitable to mine and to secure the network than trying to attack it. Okay, so if you have a farm of server and you don't know what to do with it and you try to cheat, in fact, it doesn't make sense. It's easier to earn money by just mining. So that's how Bitcoin, until now, achieved to be secure enough. Okay, so there is an incentive that you say, don't spend power completely, at least you can try to mine blocks from time to time and earn money. So some people say, yeah, it doesn't make sense, we could have a different incentives. Now what we do, for example, in Ethereum, in a few months or few years, they are about to change the protocol. We say, instead of looking at your computing power, we will look at how many coins you own. And the more you own, the more chance you will get the reward. And you can validate transactions. So in fact, we assume that if people have a lot of money or tokens to lose, they will probably not break the protocol, because if they do, they lose everything. Okay? So we have in a Dash cryptocurrency, you have the same principle. You have plenty of initiatives like that. We say, okay, you have too much to lose, so don't even try. But it's supposed to be less secure because, you never know what's going to happen if the federal authorities in the US are buying 51% of the tokens, they can shut down this network. Because as soon as one attacker is owning too much, then it's down. Here, you have to buy a lot of equipment in Bitcoin, proof of work. So, if you have another, you have a lot of initiatives, huh? You have a proof of disk space or stuff like that. You can imagine whatever you want. If it's working fine, you can initiate a project and you'll see. I think my computer is dead, and anyway, it was the end. It's already quite late. I don't know if there is any question. Maybe it's more interesting to speak about, to ask questions. So what I propose that we can discuss with people who want to discuss, exchange opinions, or you can have a drink outside if you want. So thank you for your interest. And I will be also happy if you have any idea how to present those things. If you are tech savvy, I will say, to beginners, I'm open to any feedback. Thank you.